Gulf leaders have called for an international meeting to discuss rebuilding Yemen once a peace deal is reached. A Gulf Cooperation Council meeting in Saudi has been focusing on conflicts in the region. The GCC has also vowed to work together to find a political solution to the war in Syria. The summit in Riyadh has been held at the same time as talks between Syria's armed and political opposition.
كما أعلنت دعمها للحل السياسي في سوريا.
The summit expressed keenness to sort out the problem in Syria under the UN Security Council resolutions. The international community has a joint responsibility to face terrorism and extremism and to eradicate both of them. The GCC summit will continue its efforts in cooperation with countries in this regard. The summit stresses extremism has no religion and that Islam is the religion of tolerance.
Let's get more on the issue, and we're joined by Al Jazeera correspondent Mohammed Val, who's covered Syria and Yemen extensively. Mohammed, I want to focus now on Syria because that is what the West and that is what the rest of the world is really focusing on. That's where ISIL's coming from, this fight against Assad as well. We've got these two meetings in Riyadh. We've got the GCC summit in Riyadh. We've also got the Syrian opposition meeting in Riyadh as well, trying to come to some sort of consensus in their approach to how to deal with Syria. Do you think they will be able to come to some sort of consensus?
Well, I think the first step has already started. We have seen this for the first time, comprehensive meeting between the Syrian opposition parties. We have seen Ahrar al-Sham, we have seen Jaish al-Islam, some of the groups that have in the past been not included and not people like Saudi Arabia, countries like Saudi Arabia have not been willing, and United Arab Emirates, to include these groups, considering their stance towards these groups as extremists, Islamist extremists and so on. We have seen now some ease of that stance by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These groups have joined. And now I understand that 15 groups among the Syrian opposition are going to go to those talks with the other side, the Assad regime, if they happen and when they happen. And I think that's a great step towards unifying the act among these Syrian groups. And the fact that they have met in Riyadh at the same time that the GCC leaders are meeting, and at the same time that the GCC leaders are making also their stance very clear, that they don't want Assad in any kind of compromise or any kind of peace deal that will be signed. That's very clear on their part.
On their part, exactly. I want to take you up on that particular issue now. And we're seeing the West's focus in Syria really shifting towards battling ISIL. We have the GCC leaders who say that they want Assad out of Syria. There is no middle ground here, is there?
Yes, there is no middle ground when we talk about the GCC leaders on the one hand and the West on the other hand, but also the good news is that there is more middle ground between the Syrian opposition groups and more middle ground between GCC leaders themselves and between GCC leaders and these groups, and I think that's a positive development, because when you are talking to the Western side and when you are talking eventually to Assad, you need unification, you need to unify your act, and that's something that has been missing during the last few years, since the beginning of the uprising in Syria and the civil war that ensued. And we can only understand or expect that once the Gulf leaders and also the rebel groups, once they are more unified, they will have a stronger say in any kind of deal with the West and with Assad as well.
Are you getting a sense, perhaps, that the West is trying to pressure the GCC and the Syrian opposition to kind of bring them over to their side, seeing as John Kerry has said that there are plans to have the next Syrian peace talks next week? That's a really short deadline for the meetings in Riyadh.
Yeah, let's talk about the agendas. Yeah, for this deadline or for this meeting to succeed, for the West to be able to have the GCC leaders on board, they have to look at the agendas and they have to address this core problem, this problem of the priorities. As we said yesterday, the US Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, said these Sunni countries need to do more in combating ISIL. We see here that we have two sets of priorities. Gulf leaders would like to see more Western response, favorable response with regards to some of their demands, including Iran and Assad. And unless, we have seen that in the final statement today, the final communique, they said no Assad in any compromise or any deal, and also no Iran intervention anymore. So these 2 points, in the eyes of the Gulf leaders, have to be addressed by the Western side, particularly by the Americans, in order for the Gulf countries to do more by way of what the Americans want with regards to the war on ISIL.
Now, the GCC leaders also discussed the issue of Yemen. Are they united in their strategy when it comes to Yemen?
Well, we know that they are not quite united. We know that the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, has this. They are in the war they are in that war. They are part of the war in Yemen, but they're not as enthusiastic as the Qataris or the Saudis, and they have been accused sometimes of being lukewarm or equivocal. We have also the Omanis, who are not even part of this coalition, Arab coalition in Yemen. I know that they have been discussing this behind the scenes. Of course, they haven't talked about it clearly, but it's being discussed. It's a problem there. They have to address it before they can say that they are really united. But from the final communique today, we understand that there is a kind of consensus that there should be a special conference to rebuild Yemen after any peace deal is signed, and that's at least one thing they agree on, all of them.
There's so much more to talk about, isn't there? Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mohammed Val, there, speaking to us.